Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Dharma Helper, and this is DH Reviews. This is my Season 1, Episode 9 review of Gotham. If you missed any of my other Gotham videos, there will be a link in the description of this video, as well as an annotation behind me on the screen. You can click either of those, and they will take you right to the playlist that has all of my Gotham videos in it. Also, earlier this week, I put out my Constantine Season 1, Episode 5 review, which, if you're interested in my thoughts on that, I will put the link to that playlist in the description of the video as well. So let's get started. Gotham Season 1, Episode 9 was called Lovecraft. And in this episode, someone somewhere finds out about Selina Kyle and about her being the witness that ties everything together in terms of the Wayne killing. And so they send an assassin, actually a group of assassins, to Wayne Manor to take her out. And in the course of this, Bruce and Selina get separated from everybody, and they sort of go off on their own adventure in this episode. And Harvey Bullock and Alfred team up and try to track them down, while Jim is trying to track down Lovecraft, and Jim has to deal with a lot of consequences in this episode as a result of his crusade against the corruption of Gotham City. Also in this episode, Falcone is reeling, actually, after the attack that Fish had perpetrated against his money, and we see the consequences of that in this episode. So that's kind of the story of the episode, is number one, the Wayne killing conspiracy sort of deepens, and number two, Falcone's camp is having some problems. So with that being said, let's talk about the characters of the episode, and let's first begin by talking about Alfred. And Alfred in this episode really, I would say surprised me, but I kind of knew he had it in him. And so in this episode, he really becomes that soldier that he was in his past. And he really turns it on in terms of protecting Bruce and fighting off these assassins and going toe-to-toe with Fish Mooney. And these are all things that I was really impressed to see out of Alfred, and to see that there is really no length that he is willing to go to he is willing to go to any length to protect Bruce and to keep Bruce safe. And that was something that I think the show illustrated here beautifully, and a very important aspect of Alfred's character, not only in the show, but in the comics and in the time of the Batman and all this stuff. Alfred is willing to do anything, whatever it takes, to protect Bruce and to keep Bruce safe. And we saw that in this episode. In terms of moving forward, I want to see more of Alfred's sort of soldier-like attitude and his very, I want to say, badass character. And I want to see, number one, what comes of that confrontation with Fish, where he and Fish had that conversation, and they almost sort of got along, which was kind of bizarre, but very, very cool to watch, because Alfred knows when to use force. He took down Butch, and he had that knife to his throat, and he attacked those assassins, but he's also a very suave sort of character in the way that he handled his confrontation with Fish, complimenting her and sort of intimating at the gravity of the situation. And in Gotham City, it's a system of favors and a system of owing people stuff. And now Fish has a favor that she can call on Alfred for, and by extension, Bruce Wayne. So where that shakes out is going to be cool to watch. And again, overall, just really a solid episode from the perspective of looking at Alfred. And I really enjoyed seeing his character sort of let his hair down a little bit and really let loose in this episode. And it was well timed and well executed, I think, in terms of this being the mid-season finale. Next characters I want to talk about. Let's talk about what happened with Bruce and what happened with Selina. Again, like I said, they were separated during the attack on Wayne Manor, and in this episode, Bruce and Selina sort of get closer, and they become more friends, and Bruce gets more training in terms of parkour and jumping around and keeping his balance and stuff. And that goes along the lines of what I was talking about and what I expected out of seeing Selina and Bruce interact, is that Selina would teach Bruce about the parkour aspect of being Batman and the balance and all this stuff. And what I wasn't expecting, what I was pleasantly surprised about, was how Bruce got out of the manor like I had wanted him to get out of the manor. I've been saying every time I bring him up in a review, get out of the manor, get out of the manor, go see Gotham City. And in this episode, he does that. And it's very interesting to see that contrast between Wayne Manor and the slums and the dirt and the grime of Gotham City. And his reaction to that was pretty cool and pretty interesting. And it's a very important beat for his character and his development, and not only as a person, as Bruce Wayne, but adding to that repertoire of the things that make him Batman, is he now has an understanding of the common people of Gotham City. And he has something else to fight for other than revenge and other than personal vendetta against the people who killed his parents. And I think that's a message that the show has, again, really illustrated on this first half of the season. We saw the Balloon Man, we saw the psychiatrist with the spirit of the goat. We saw all these people fighting for selfish reasons, for using really sketchy methods. And now we're seeing, over the course of this first half of the season, not only the physical things that he's going to need, that Bruce is going to need to be Batman, his detective skills, his parkour skills, his fighting skills, his ability to move quietly and silently, but we're seeing the ethos of Batman, the code of conduct of Batman kind of start to take shape, and start to distinguish him from these characters like the Balloon Man and the Spirit of the Goat. Now he has something higher than himself to fight for. And I thought that was very nicely done by the show and very nicely illustrated in terms of what separates Batman from all these other characters. Why Batman is Batman. And talking about Selina, we see the two of them, Bruce and Selina, get very close in this episode. And that again speaks to the relationship that Catwoman has with Batman, and speaks to the relationship that Selina Kyle will have with Bruce Wayne when they get older. And I enjoyed that sort of nod to it, but I also enjoyed seeing Selina open up again a little bit more in this episode and start to shake away that isolation that's kept her on the streets all this time, and start to open up a little bit and say, you know what, I can't do this by myself. I can't get on by myself, and I need somebody, and Bruce is that somebody. And maybe the two of us can be friends. Maybe the two of us can be together. And I enjoyed seeing that. And I think that's something that the show handled very well this first half of the season. If you look at Selina's character to begin with, and then you look at where she's come in terms of this episode, it's very nicely handled on the show's part. And something that I want to see in terms moving forward for both of these characters is how they will continue to interact and what that sort of relationship develops into going into the second half of the season. And now that Selina is exposed as being the witness for this killing, what she will do and where she will go. Other than that, again, really solid episode out of those two, and something that I'm really looking forward to watching moving forward here into the second half of the season. Let's talk about Carmine Falcone, who is probably my least favorite aspect of this episode. Carmine is, like I said, reeling from that attack that Fish perpetrated against his armory, and he brings Penguin in and he says, how did Maroni know where my money was? And in this episode, Carmine disappointed me. He forgot. It feels like he forgot essentially everything that he had learned in the first half of this season, everything that he had talked about in the first half of this season. Number one, he completely forgot that Penguin had told him that Fish was the spy. And I bring this up because Carmine had said previously in the season that there is a lot of truth in what a dead man will tell you. And why would he go back on that and say that Penguin is lying to him or using the vendetta of him and Fish to put Fish as the perpetrator? Why would he go back on that? That seems uncharacteristic and almost foolish and ignorant. Number two, he's ignoring the evidence that's right in front of his face. There were only, 10, 11 people that knew where that money was? How did Maroney know where that money was? There's no possible way that Maroney got a mole into Carmine's operation. There's no possible. That's not Maroney's MO. Maroney is a thug. He is a killer. He is going to blast you in the face. He's not going to stab you in the back. That is ignoring that aspect of the evidence. And he's also ignoring the fact that, okay, if you go back to that scene, right, in this episode, where they have that dinner and he kills the one guy and he raises the tariffs. Who is the one person who has no problem with those raised tariffs? Fish. That's suspicious. 25% is a lot of money. And everybody should have a problem with that. Everybody should be mad about that. That's the logical reaction. And that's the reaction that 90% of the Carmine Falcone family of that camp had to these raised tariffs. But Fish is okay with it for some reason. Fish is like, well, we're family, we bleed together, we succeed together, all this crap. And that is sketchy. When somebody is okay with that kind of stuff, that is sketchy. And Fish has been doing that over the course of this first half of the season. She's been the only one really behind Carmine 100%. And in the world of the mafia and the mob, when somebody is smiling in front of your face, 9 times out of 10, they got a gun to your back, or a knife to your back, or a bomb to your back, or some kind of violent weapon that they're getting ready to use against you. You get smiles to your face, that's what you need to watch out for. And Carmine is smart enough, and Carmine is wise enough to watch out for that. We just didn't see that in this episode, and that was disappointing for me. And hopefully, as we get into the second half of this season, something somewhere is going to click for him, and he's going to say, okay, Penguin, you were right, I'm sorry, Fish has got to go, but we have to do it the right way. And right now, the right way is to let her believe that we know that she's good, but in reality, as soon as she makes her move, we're gonna cut her throat. And we didn't see that this episode. What we saw was, again, somebody who was ignoring the evidence and not seeing the bigger picture, which was uncharacteristic of Carmine, and which is why I was disappointed with that character. Let's wrap up my characters discussion with the big guy, Jim Gordon. And Jim in this episode tracks down Lovecraft at his apartment or tenement building or wherever he was. And he discovers that Lovecraft is not the big guy behind this conspiracy. Lovecraft was looking into the conspiracy himself, and he found out all this information about how somebody somewhere was messing around with Wayne Enterprise stock as if they knew something bad was going to happen before the murder took place. And so this hit squad that was going to go after Selena was also going to go after him. And ultimately, they do end up going after him and killing him with Jim's gun and making it look like a suicide. So Jim ends up having to explain himself. And in typical Jim Gordon fashion, he does not understand the go along to get along philosophy. And he stands up for himself, and he maintains his principles and tells the mayor to go kiss his ass. And he deals with the consequences of that finally in this episode, where he is reassigned to be a security guard for Arkham Asylum. And honestly, that was the most surprising thing for me from this episode, was seeing Jim Gordon sort of pay the piper, so to speak. And to see the result of his valor and his steadfastness, you can only bite the hand that feeds you so many times, right? And in this episode, the mayor's finally had enough, and he's dealt with. And that goes back to what I've been saying, how Jim's approach is not working. And hopefully in the second half of the season here, we see a different approach, and we see something else happen. Going back to what Captain Essence said earlier this season, this is Gotham City, right? If you don't bend, you're going to break. And in the second half of the season, I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see either Jim bends or he breaks. And which happens is going to be pretty cool to watch. Speaking very briefly about that scenario, about him going to Arkham Asylum, now at Arkham Asylum, he is useless to Penguin, to Oswald, and by extension, useless to Carmine. So my theory there is that Penguin will bend Carmine's ear and say, we got to get Jim back on the force. He's going to be pretty helpful for us. And so that's going to be Jim's way back onto the force, is bending or breaking in terms of an alliance with Carmine and pushing himself further into Carmine's services and further into Carmine's debt. And what I expect to see out of Jim this next half of the season is somebody who is understanding of the way that Gotham works. Overall, in this episode, I thought, again, you can only bite the hand that feeds you so many times, dude. And ultimately, he has nobody to blame for his situation but himself. And he's doing more harm to himself and more harm to his cause than good. So that kind of wraps up my main characters discussion. Some characters that I want to briefly touch on. Number one, Ivy, we saw in this episode. And I've been asking for more Ivy and asking for more Ivy. And Ivy, in this episode, we finally get to figure out what happened to her. And what happened to her was that her father, we know that her father was killed and framed for the Wayne killings. And as a result of that, her mother apparently was driven to suicide. And so she's an orphan now. And the thing I want to talk about Ivy is that in terms of origin stories and reasonings behind her being a villain, having her father killed by the police and her mother driven to suicide as a result, I kind of understand why she might be skeptical about the police and why she might turn to a life of crime. The thing that I want to highlight here is the contrast between Bruce and between Ivy. Bruce, rich kid, parents are killed by bad guys. He turns into Batman. Ivy, poor kid, parents are killed by the good guys, the police, and she turns into Poison Ivy, the supervillain. So that contrast there was pretty interesting and pretty noteworthy. And again, I think it speaks to the overall theme of Gotham, which is Gotham turns you into what you are. Ultimately, Gotham is working against you and piling up against you, and everybody is on a knife edge, and you can go one way or you could go the other. You could be the Poison Ivy of the world, or you could be the Bruce Wayne of the world. And what happens is a flip of the coin, and that was really cool to look at. So that's Ivy in this episode. We saw a little bit of Edward in this episode, his sort of the stuff we've come to expect out of Edward, his sort of excited behavior, his very caring nature, and stuff like that. Second half of the season, what I want to see out of Ivy, what I want to see out of Edward, is along the same lines. I want to see more from Ivy. I want to see more from Edward. I want to see why Edward turns into a villain, because we haven't seen that yet. We've seen a lot of why Poison Ivy becomes who she is. We've seen why Penguin becomes who he is. We've seen a little bit about Harvey Dent. And in terms of Harvey Dent, what I'd like to see is his reaction to Lovecraft's suicide, and what he does to help or to ignore Jim Gordon, now that Jim essentially has no use for him, use to him, I should say. So those characters, Ivy, Edward, those sort of side characters, Harvey, I want to see more of them in the second half of the season, obviously, and I want to see more of the development of what makes these characters turn into who they are. That being said, that kind of covers my characters discussion of the episode. Overall, probably my favorite episode of the season. I enjoyed that we got, again, I enjoy when criticisms that I have are addressed. And they may not be, my specific criticism may not be addressed, but the fact that I had this criticism and that it was addressed means a lot in terms of my enjoyment of the show. When I'm talking about, the whole Bruce leaving the manor thing, I've been talking about that for 3, 4, 5 reviews, and we saw that in this episode, and it was rewarding and satisfying and interesting to look at. We saw more Poison Ivy, and that was addressed, and that was rewarding to look at. We saw that obviously there is an answer to this question, who killed the Waynes? And that was something that I brought up last review. We need to see, who killed the Waynes. And obviously there is an answer, and the show is moving towards that answer. And that was something that I think really impressed me in this episode and in this half of the season. And I want to see where that goes next half of the season and moving forward. And ultimately, when that question is answered, when this conspiracy is undone, what sort of mysteries and problems will the show present to sustain the show in future seasons? So that being said, if you enjoyed this review, leave a thumbs up, leave a like so I know I'm headed in the right direction. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more reviews like this. I do Constantine reviews on Monday, Gotham reviews on Tuesday, Scorpion reviews, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. reviews on Wednesday, and Scorpion reviews on Thursday. This week, there's no Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. episode, so there will be 2 Scorpion reviews. My Scorpion review from last week, which I ignored, and then my Scorpion review from this week's episode. That'll be Wednesday and Thursday. If you enjoy Gotham as a show, I encourage you to check out Constantine. It's another DC Comics property. It's got a lot of magic and voodoo and spirits and stuff, and it's got a very nice look to it, very good effects, visual effects, nice story to it, very good characters, and it goes along those lines of very similar themes of Gotham in terms of the good guys not always being good, the bad guys not always being bad. And it's a very nice show to watch. And now that Gotham is taking its mid-season break, if you enjoy Gotham, go ahead and check out Constantine on Friday at 10 p.m. on NBC. Check that out. Really great show. And if you're interested in my thoughts on that series, again, I'll leave a link in the description down below. If you want to talk about this show, Gotham, talk about it in the comments section or hit me up on Twitter at the DH Reviews. And as always, share these videos, get these videos out there on Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, wherever you got to get these videos out there. In terms of the future of this review, until Gotham comes back, what I was thinking of doing is maybe one character review every week until the show comes back. So, for example, I'll do maybe 15-20 minutes talking about Alfred, or 15-20 minutes talking about Bruce, or 15-20 minutes talking about Edward Nigma, or a different character every week, and my thoughts on that character for the first half of the season. If that's something you're interested in, leave a comment down below, hit me up on Twitter. If you have an idea of who I should talk about, leave a comment down below, hit me up on Twitter. With that being said, I think that covers everything. So again, thank you guys for watching. I've been Dharma Helper, and I will see you guys in the next video.